Oh no. Okay. We are live. Almost.
Almost.
Yes, we're live now.
Yeah, live.
Perfect. So people will start joining now, right?
Yeah, I think we can now admit them.
Okay, perfect. Let's do that. Hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us. We're just going to give it another couple of minutes before we start. While you enter, just some safeguarding. Please keep your microphones muted. And if you want to speak at any point, if you have a question or something you want to share, just raise your hand on Zoom and we will be sure to get to you. Yes, you can also see on the chat that we will be sharing the participation safeguarding guidelines, but welcome and thank you for joining right on time. We will begin shortly. Amazing to see the room getting full. I somehow feel warmer already. Okay, I want to be mindful of time and also thanking everyone who joined exactly on time. I want to share with everyone a warm welcome. My name is Mariana. I go by the pronouns she, they, and I am part of the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, who's hosting this conversation today. I am delighted to be the host on their behalf. This event has been organized in light of the launch of our new watchdog on menstrual freedom. It has poems, texts, arts, and pictures that were submitted by young people from all around the world about this theme. And if you want, you can actually download it through the link that will be shared on the chat. My colleagues Maria and Ruth will be likely sharing a link with you. We hugely encourage you to download it. It's very interesting. It portrays very different experiences with menstruation and also especially different ones regarding to where you live and how you have been raised. And it's also very interesting to break stigma by hearing other people's experience. So we highly encourage everyone to download it. Again, just for some housekeeping, we ask everyone who joins us to keep your mics muted. And if you have any comments or questions, please raise your hand and we will call you. So for the next 1 hour and a half, we will be inviting different speakers to discuss menstruation, period poverty, and advocacy. And we will kick off the conversation by talking about period stigma and advocacy, shall we? So the first person that I'd like to invite for that is Candice. Just before I ask Candice to introduce themselves, I will ask everyone who's watching who feels comfortable to do so to share how your experience is with your period. So does your period have its own personality and it comes whenever it's want on their own time, or does it work like a clock? How do you feel about it? Just share in the chat so we can interact further. How is your experience with your period? And while you do this, I'll then ask Candice to introduce themselves. Candice, the floor is yours. If you could please say a few words about you and maybe share also how is your experience with your period.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Youth Coalition for having me here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's really affirming knowing that a lot of menstruators all over the world go through the same experience, But, you know, personally, with regards to my period has its own personality. I won't lie. Every month, it's just a different thing. It chooses to be nice in some months, and then it chooses to be very, very bad in other months. But I've at least decided to embrace, you know, the fact that I am period positive. And although the symptoms, I don't understand the symptoms, I at least am very positive towards my period. So yeah, I'm Candice Chirwa, affectionately known as the Minister of Menstruation in South Africa. I am an academic, so I've done my master's in menstrual health management, currently doing my PhD, looking at menstrual taboos in South Africa. I'm a TED speaker, author, you know, just a go-getter. And I'm really, really excited to be a part of this conversation and getting into the conversation we're going to have about taboos, menstrual stigmas, and advocacy and education.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I do relate to that a lot. My period also has its own personality and will sometimes be very nice to me, and other times will just make me unable to get up completely. I just have to deal with it. My plans don't come to it. It's their world now. So I also feel like that. But yeah, I think moving into our theme, also everyone who's still here can please share on the chat. Please continue to share how it is for you. I see some people saying that it is a time for reflection and taking care of themselves. It's generally quite painful and it helps to keep track of it. Definitely. I feel like since I've started keeping track of it, I've learned so much. But yeah, please continue to share throughout the conversation. Is more than welcome. Now moving into our theme, Candice, could you share a bit about what is period stigma and why is it important to address it?
So I always start like the conversation around period stigma with my own experience, and then working its way up into a more, you know, academic level, because I think period stigma has impacted us, all of us, you know, whether you are a menstruator or whether you're not, there has been some form of interaction we've had with period stigma. But for me, when I started my period at the age of 10, my period stigma was met with silence. You know, often I would always think about the conversation I had with my mom, and it was just one conversation, you know, and it made me feel like I was in trouble. It made me feel as if I had broken the TV or broken some like glassware in the house, when in fact it was an inevitable part of growing up. You know, like menstruation is seen as the final stage, as puberty, as a lot of medical experts say, and yet my experience of my first time seeing period blood was just like scary. It was just really, really scary. And you know, when I had that conversation with my mom, I really wished it was more affirming and more empowering to actually understand, like, you know, every month there is an egg that is released that travels down your fallopian tube to go into your uterus. If it's not fertilized, then you have your period, and that is a part of growing up. And besides that, you're going to experience a different form of symptoms, and there's different ways that you can manage this. But all I got was, here is a sanitary pad. This is how you manage your sanitary pad. Don't tell anyone about it, and that's it, you know. And that made me feel as if I had a disease. It made me feel as if I was the only person who had this thing, and I couldn't tell anyone else. So from the age of 10 till about 21, I spent 11 years in isolation, just trying to understand this thing, you know, not knowing that it's a part of nature, it's a biological function. So, you know, as time came on in doing the research and understanding, you know, what period positivity means, it really is about breaking the stigma, and it really is about like unpacking all of these different period myths and taboos we hear. You know, a lot of young menstruators are told that when they do start menstruating, they're not meant to touch a boy, or they're not meant to touch a plant, or they're not expected to do all these other things. It's a long list of what we can and cannot do on our period. And I always just advocate for the fact that when you are on your period, it is your period, so you can decide what you want to do. And the period stigma is really based on a lot of misinformation. If I think about it, it's like fake news. You know, we're told, don't do this because this will die. Don't touch this because this will die. And it's like, well, actually, it's proven that it won't, you know. So it's really about unpacking and unlearning and removing the myths and actually instilling some form of empowerment and education. And the work that I do really speaks to just educating young girls on understanding that every month they are going to menstruate and every month this is what's going to happen, and embracing that and being confident about it. So yeah, period stigmas are real, right? And I think what often people tend to underestimate is that something so simple as don't touch a plant or stay away for the days that you're menstruating has turned into something so violent in different societies, as we'll hear from our other speakers. You know, there's actual menstrual practices where menstruators are expected to hide themselves in menstrual huts and isolate themselves. And if you look at the conditions of those huts, it's an infringement of human rights. It's an infringement of dignity, you know. So something that is seen as natural and biological is holding us back because of these myths and taboos, and that is really unfortunate.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I
That's
think
okay.
you put it very well, how getting our periods and the stigma that immediately comes into us when that happens, it just really puts us in the situation of isolation, and there is so much misinformation about it that just contributes to it. I mean, I remember the feeling of freedom that it gave me once one friend mentioned that she had got her period, because I was like, oh my God, we can talk about it now because someone has brought it up. I was too scared of bringing it up. It was so like, I mean, and it's so simple. It's just us sharing experiences, but the stigma that comes with it, you're so scared of bringing that up. And again, all the kinds of misinformation that are spread about it just made us, it makes us feel like we are also putting others in danger, and we are constantly in danger just because we're getting our periods. I remember hearing the most random things, like you can sit on a chair where a man has sat because you get pregnant if you are on your period, and you are like, this is also so against what a period is, that you will get pregnant during it. But you know, it's just like basic sex ed that we also need to have, and that is denied from us since the beginning, and it's just fed into this kind of misinformation, and this can be just so harmful for all of our lives. So yeah, I think you really captured it. I would also like to ask from our attendees and from our other speakers, if you want to share on the chat other specific forms of stigma that you have experienced in your community related to menstruation. If you feel comfortable to sharing it, please just add it on the chat and we will go back to it. And while you do that, Candice, I was wondering if I could ask you to talk a bit about your work and initiatives and advocacy projects that you have worked on in your context. You mentioned it a little bit, but if you could walk us through a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, it really all started with research. And I think this is why I often believe that, you know, research is always fundamental to an activist's role in society. You know, activists can't do the work in lobbying and trying to change the world if they don't have the research in guiding them. And it really was the research that informed me to change the narrative around periods in South Africa. You know, in certain settings, a lot of young girls are told that, you know, if they menstruate at a very early age, it's because they've been naughty with boys. And that then leads them to, you know, start menstruation at 8 years old and only tell their necessary guardians or parents or whoever, maybe 5 years later, that they've been menstruating. And this is a scary time to be navigating the stage of puberty with not knowing exactly how to manage period products, how to manage period pain, how to manage any form of period symptoms. So it was really that research that really told me, you know, let's change that narrative, and having empowering workshops where young people could just claim the space and learn about their bodies at the same time. You know, I go back to my own experience. The first time I learned about periods or anything about sexual education related, and how the girls are split away from the boys and the boys would be playing on the soccer field, and we were told, you know, all of these scary things. We're shown really scary pictures of STDs. And it was a really scary time, you know, and I think for me, if I had someone like the Minister of Menstruation when I was 13 years old, I know I would have a different relationship with my body during my young adolescent life, you know. So yeah, the workshops are really focused on having different activities where young people are on their feet, they're engaging with the content. They kind of confidently can say the word vagina. That is one thing that I say has to be one thing that needs to be stressed, you know, saying something that is often seen as a stigma to taboo, our vaginas, you know, and claiming power to that. And so far we've engaged with over 500 participants in South Africa, and we want to do more. We want to be in communities where menstruation is not even spoken about. We want to be in communities, especially religious communities, where, you know, often menstruators are told to isolate themselves, sleep on the floor, you know, not do anything on their period. And we really just want to tackle and be direct about unpacking the period taboo in those societies. But beyond just the workshops, the Minister of Menstruation is really a platform where any person can ask anything period related. And the reason why, you know, the word or the term Minister of Menstruation came about is that a friend of mine was like, you know, you're doing so much work and you should be dubbed as the Minister of Menstruation. And also a little bit of history in terms of South Africa, we have so many ministers. So it just came as a very punny thing to be like, you know what, we have so many ministers, so we can also have a Minister of Menstruation. But the whole agenda is really just to unpack and normalize the conversations and experiences of menstruators, and also to allow for non-menstruators to learn. You know, we can't always just put the onus and responsibility on menstruators to change the world, to change policy. We need non-menstruators to be involved. We need them to be proper allies. And yeah, that's always the call to action for the Minister of Menstruation. Let's establish a period positive world so that the next generation of menstruators can celebrate their first period and not think of it as a fearful time. Yeah.
That all sounds amazing. And I gotta say, the name is so catchy and so good. It is amazing. Yes. While you were speaking, I could see that some of our attendees were also sharing their own experience. So I'll just pick some. Some people shared that whenever they're in a bad mood, guys always ask and assume that they're on their period. This is also a classic. And that generally makes me more upset, because they can't be upset without others thinking that they're on their period. Yes, this is also something that comes on the stigma, is kind of gaslighting your feelings on, oh, it's because you're on your period. That's why. It's not how you feel. It's something to be taken into consideration.
And that's why it's so important to educate the boy child about these things, because they become men and they will enter into workspaces with their fellow menstruators and will downplay our experiences. And whether I'm on my period or whether I'm not, my emotions are valid. So there's that notion that when you are menstruating, that you are irrational, over moody. Yes, I have every right to be irrational and moody and go through all the things I go through because I am experiencing hormonal fluctuations. So it's like, understand that. And I think the moment menstrual allies have that education and understand what we go through month to month, then they'll choose to be more sensitive. And instead of asking questions like, oh, you're on your period, they'll rather ask, what can I do to help? Is there anything that you need help with? So yeah, menstrual education for me is not just only exclusive to the girl child, but also to the boy child, because they will too have menstruators in their lives.
Yes, definitely. And also to just, which is something that we're also going to talk throughout this conversation today, but also just breaking the narrative of, you know, only women menstruate and all of this is also a very important key part of this conversation that we got to have. But just still scrolling through the answers, I see that someone says, I remember my mom teaching me that whenever I went to buy pads, I needed to hide them so that no one saw them. I also was taught to really wrap them up so that no one would see them when I threw them out. Yes. So these are also this whole care about when you get your period, making sure that no one can notice that you got your period. And it is, again, another burden, you know, for you're already going through so much and you still got to make sure that people don't realize that you're going through a lot. You know, it's just very problematic. Someone else said the stigma in some communities in Uganda is a girl menstruating should not cook food for the family, and the different names they attach to menstruation. Example, I'm sorry if I'm not
Russians are
pronouncing this
coming.
right. Is it
The
Russian?
Russians
Oh
are
yeah.
coming. Yeah.
The Russians are coming. You have
Yeah.
slaughtered the cow. She's dirty. A lot more. Wow.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
At some point today, we're also going to talk about these euphemisms and how problematic this can be to not address menstruation by what it is, by saying its name and etc. I'll save some for later. Also because I want to continue talking with you, Candice, and actually a bit of a challenging, maybe tricky question, or it might not, but I was wondering if you could let us know from your experience and from your expertise, how can we break period stigma? What are things that young people can do to fight it on their own context? What are suggestions you have regarding that, ideas?
Yeah, so from a personal level, I do think it's a matter of understanding what your own opinions and views on periods are. And if you find that there are any problematic ones, doing the research to unpack any form of stigma that you might have individually. But then it's also about moving that from an individual level to then an interpersonal level in terms of who you're friends with, your family, and then getting an understanding of what their viewpoints are. I'm always that type of person who will always challenge people and saying, I'm always curious to know why periods are seen so negatively, and bringing it up as a conversation, either at the dinner table or in any social setting, just to really challenge that stigma face on, because a lot of the things that we as menstruators are told or expected to carry or being conditioned to believe is that we have to remain silent. We're not expected to talk about these things, So the first thing that I always tell people is that the first thing we can do in removing the period stigma is talking openly about it, and talking openly in the sense that we are not, sort of making it to be disgusting or talking negatively, but rather just sharing our own experiences in an empowering way to raise awareness to people to understand that this is what we go through every month and it needs to be considered seriously. Because when we talk openly about it and the more awareness we raise, then it gets into the head of the necessary policy changes. It can be like, okay, well, we've been having the conversation a lot about period leave in the workplace. We see that there's no any form of policy that addresses this. Maybe we should do that, So that's the only way I believe we can sort of remove the stigma in talking openly about it. And it's also about calling a thing a thing. So not saying Aunt Flo has arrived, or Russia has invaded, or Tom, or time of the week, time of the month, or there's so many euphemisms. It's calling it what it is and saying I'm on my period, because then people will realize that what you're going through is real and it is serious, right? And beyond that, then we have to think about menstrual education and what does that look like. I've seen a lot of initiatives where people have been creating different formats of menstrual education, either it be animated, either it be in the form of a podcast, either it be in a book. There's just different formats and mediums where people can learn about menstrual education. And from the Minister of Menstruation's perspective, there's a book called Flow, the book about menstruation, where people can access it online or physically. And you can learn about menstruation, not only from a physical point of view, but from a political point of view, the impact it has on us as human beings, beyond it just us bleeding every 7 days, like every month for 7 days rather. So I think it's really about increasing the awareness to the different forms of initiatives that are driving menstrual education out there. And it's also about ensuring that young people are learning about it in school. I find it still to be scary that young people don't have any access to this information about something that directs them, like it just doesn't make sense, like it impacts them directly rather. So I'm just trying to see a way in which schools can be involved in this, in providing comprehensive sexuality education, and in a way that's affirming and empowering, and it doesn't just speak about what menstruation is from a biological perspective. So yeah, we speak openly about it, we need more education on it, and I think we can move a little bit closer to removing that period stigma.
Yes, I love that. I agree completely. I mean, comprehensive sexual education is key for us to advance on this. And as one of the things that you mentioned that we could do to break period stigma was also to speak more positive about it. I just selected two answers from the chat that reflect on that. So someone said that their relation with their period is that their period has been very regular over the past year, and the pain levels have gradually reduced over the same period. So they're now happy to have the option to keep doing stuff they love, or to just rest during their period. And they shared as a fun fact, they're on the period right now, very timely. And someone else has shared also that they love their menstruation, they practice belly dance, and this helps a lot, which is also a good thing that helps some of us is doing exercise during their periods. For me, it's definitely something that really helps with cramps and etc. So this is, I'm not saying that this will work for everyone, but it is something to be tested. And lastly, just someone reinforcing what you just mentioned, that they agree we need to raise children, both girls and boys, to use the right words. So saying menstruation, vagina, penis, etc. We need to normalize this and remove the shame and taboo around it. So very, very in line. And lastly, someone just said they're really happy to hear you talk about implementing period leave. They're living with adenomyosis, which has been very tough for them over the years. And for a long time, they were also afraid of pursuing certain office jobs because they didn't think they could keep the job, as they would be away managing excruciating pain 3 days each month. And this is also something that I think if we all had, and by all we mean all, knowledge about period and menstruation and the fact that this happens and is not a drama, and this is not someone trying to get off of work, this is their life and a condition that they live with, we would have better policies around it, or I like to think we would. But also just as an invitation, if you want to say anything regarding that.
Yeah, you know what, I always just say this, that menstruation is normal, but experiencing excruciating pain isn't. And we have been conditioned to believe that with our periods should come very bad pain, and therefore we would just expected to live with it. And just, and it's tough because there are a lot of people who are menstruators and they experience very severe pain, and that pain gets in their way of doing any daily socioeconomic activity. They can't go to work, they can't go to school, yet alone they can't even get out of bed, and when they do have the chance to raise this up with a doctor or medical practitioner, they're just told it's your period, it's expected. So there's a lot of stories that I've heard of menstruators going through being disregarded in the medical space because their period pain is not believed. And I think we need to be, thinking about what a period positive world looks like beyond just no period stigma, and having access to period products. It means we're also in spaces where we can be accommodated for if we are experiencing any form of period conditions. So if you are someone who goes to work, is there, period product dispensers in the bathroom? Beyond that, is there, access to painkillers if you forgot them at home? Is there access to any form of medical treatment in terms of, if you need a hot water bottle, or there's a room in the office where they say, for menstruators or for anyone who is not feeling well, he has a room where you can just relax and take your time, but you're still at work. What does that look like? And I think we need to be speaking practically on that, and just seeing whether it can work. And I'm glad I'm seeing companies like Zomato, for instance, that have implemented that last year. I think it was in 2020 or 2021, that said, we are implementing period paid leave for our menstruators in the workplace, so they are able to work from home. But if they're menstruating and they just can't get up, then it's fine. They'll be paid for those days that they can't. There are different countries like Zambia who have Mother's Day, where it's 3 days that menstruators can take off work and they can be at home. So it just needs to be spoken more about, and it needs to become a reality. And when we do have conversations about period paid leave, often people tend to be discriminatory and say, well, it's an excuse for menstruators to not work. It's like, well, with the pandemic, we've been able to work from home. So we are able to work from home. Just give us the necessities that we need on our period to manage our period, because what we go through is a lot. From a personal experience, this will be my last point. From the personal experience, I experience brain fog. So there are days where I find myself putting my cell phone in my fridge because I thought it was milk. It happens. So, there are moments where we experience very intense period symptoms. And so we are not fully productive as we are. And that is not a way to like cop out to say we don't want to work. It's just biological. It is something that is actually happening to us. So the least companies can do is say, work from home. If you have to work in your pajamas and you're still working from home and you're on your period, it's fine. Just work from home. It's okay. No discrimination there.
Yes, I fully agree as with everything you've said so far. I wanna thank you so much for sharing your experience about period stigma. We will invite you back again before we close this session. But for now, I would ask you to please allow me to move on to the next theme, which is period poverty and access to menstrual management products. To talk about this theme, I would ask Victorina to join. I see you here in Spotlighted already. Hello. Just before we kick off, I would just invite other speakers and attendees to share on the chat what products do they use during their periods, and if they are feeling comfortable, you can also show it on camera, show these products on camera. Of course, you might not have it around you, so please feel free to just share on the chat. As I knew this was coming, I actually got my menstrual cup next to me, but please feel free to share it. And Victorina, thank you for joining us. I was wondering if you could also introduce yourself and maybe share your favorite period products.
Of course. Yeah. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this close group discussion about menstruation. So my name is Victorina, but you can call me Vic. I'm here from the Philippines. By day, I work as a creative operations lead at Canva here in Manila. So I hope some of you guys are familiar with Canva. But outside of my work, I do work as a personal advocate of adolescent and sexual and reproductive health, and I actively explore spaces where I could utilize my skills as a researcher, as a writer, and a public speaker about this advocacy that I have of mine. So I've written some studies about adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and I've also written some studies on gender-based violence. So it's really something that's really close to my heart, only because I grew up as a girl that was a daughter of a women's health worker. So it was really that moment when I was a child that I was really interested about menstruation. And then I heard a lot of people, shaming me for it, saying that it's disgusting that I'm so interested about this topic, and it's not something that was openly discussed in school. It was very biological, the way that it was approached in school, the way that they taught about menstruation. So I did sort of like use that as an inspiration, that growing up, I would, use spaces to voice out my opinion and talk about menstruation out in the open, because it's something that needs to be discussed. So we are able to break that taboo that's attached with menstruation, that hinders people from actually, progressing from these taboos, that hinders them to embrace menstruation as a natural thing. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you for the introduction. I was wondering if you could share a bit with us, why is it important to have menstrual education within the households, but also beyond it, and especially to have an intergenerational dialogue on menstruation?
Yeah. So it is very important to have an open discussion in our households about menstruation, because it's like our first school. It's where we learn a lot of our firsts, a lot of our first mindsets, first perspective, and first view about the world. So it's really like a crucial place where teenagers, young girls develop their narratives about menstruation. Because in the study that I conducted back when my undergraduate study, so when I conducted that study, I found that a lot of girls actually perceive their mothers as the most credible source of information when it comes to sex related topics, regardless if, regardless of all other factors like whether they have a degree or not, whether they're inclined with these topics or not. So they do perceive their moms as the most credible source of information. But at the same time, they're not willing, they don't think that their moms are willing to talk about this openly about them. So there's a gap there. There's an opportunity that's not being tapped. So it's really important because at the same time, even though they're really willing to talk about it with their moms, a lot of the messages that they received during their menarche or their first menstruation was very negative. So echoing what Candice has shared, that people started telling them that, oh, so you're having a period now, you can't get pregnant, or like started telling them these unhygienic beliefs that we have here in the Philippines about menstruation, like washing your face with the first blood that you have in your underwear. So these kinds of things that are highly negative, or like being much more strict to them, their parents being much more strict with them going out with boys and hanging out with friends, because then there's that tendency to get pregnant. So it's very fearful. It's something that's really confusing for an adolescent girl who is not even able to understand and grasp the whole concept yet. And yet they're already being told a lot about these negative stuff about menstruation. So setting the tone negatively could hinder them from embracing menstruation as a normal thing. And what we learn in our adolescence is something that's very difficult to unlearn as we grow into adults. And not all of us get the opportunities to unlearn things. Not all of us get the opportunities to expose ourselves to something or some people that could, break our biases. So it's really important that we hone children within the household and educate them within the household, so that when they get out there, they're actually people who are more confident about themselves and are equipped about what they should do about their menstruation, how they should handle it, and that they're taught that menstruation is something that's very natural and something that they shouldn't fear of. Intergenerational discussion is also important because we want to understand that there are some cultural practices that needs to be respected, or maybe religious practices as well. So it's important to talk about this from generation to another, so we are able to find a compromise and keep ourselves in check, on whether or not what practice do we have about menstruation that respects our traditions, but at the same time ensures that we're honoring girls' rights to menstruation, ensure that we are still doing that in a way that it's hygienic and it's safe for young girls and how they practice menstruation, and also getting perspectives from different people across different generations, so we could just constantly improve and make a better future for our young girls out there as they grow older, to like, so they would grow into a world that's more welcoming about menstruation as a topic that's discussed out in the open, instead of something that has to be hidden in the corners of the house or in schools, etc. So yeah.
Thank you. And it's super interesting to hear. I was thinking of my own journey of knowing more about menstruation and how it all happens. My mom is a doctor, so I think I had the whole very medicalized thing once I got my period. However, I really feel like I learned the most in the internet. It was really the internet that would introduce to me all these different period products that would work for me way better than, my mom only had the one that she always used. And I was like, this is not working. So it was really on the internet that I would learn a lot. And I was wondering if, especially for this generation right now that is, always online, have been people who have been born on the internet, because I think I was like 5 once we could have something like that, but although still young. But I was wondering, and I want to also leave this message on the chat on this question on the chat for the people who are here with us. Where did most of your knowledge on menstruation came from? As in, was it from the household? Did you learn this by your family? Was it in school, or was it on the internet? This is also an interesting thing to think. Where is this conversation starting nowadays? But I definitely understand how it is definitely important that we have this at home and that we discuss this at home and honestly everywhere. But
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could also share how can we encourage, because we know that these conversations
Mhm.
are not the easiest to have, especially with the generation that has lived through the stigma and not necessarily challenged it as much as I think
Mhm.
we do. So
Mhm.
this can be really difficult to have. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit your input on how can we encourage conversations about menstruation to happen between families or between a group of friends. How can
Yeah.
we, I think it also relates to Candice's question
Yeah.
on how do we break period stigma, because talking about it is a way of doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I think the simplest way really that we could encourage more conversations about menstruation is to utilize small opportunities, like maybe you have a blood stain in your clothing. Maybe your child saw you washing your washable pad, or maybe you're using a menstrual cup and somebody saw it in your house and they want to learn more about it, or they're curious as to what it is used for. So there are a lot of opportunities, small opportunities actually, to so that we could utilize, so we could educate our brothers or sisters or children or friends about menstruation. And nowadays there's a lot of menstrual products out there, and women are really actively exploring what menstrual products best fits their lifestyle, best fits what they're comfortable about. So there's a lot of room now to share these kinds of things, and maybe influence other people to look at menstruation also from your perspective. So these little opportunities at home is something that I think that it's something that's already doable for us. So I think this little thing sum up, and if we do become much more open and much more active in finding opportunities to open these conversations to our members of the family, then that is something that I think would really make some ripples. If Because if we're not comfortable talking about it at home, how can we be comfortable talking about it outside of our homes, right? So I think that's really the thing that we could do there, and also to set the tone, especially if you're a parent figure or a parent yourself. There's really that authority and that privilege to set the tone about how you talk about menstruation in the household. So of course, if you talk about it in a way, in a negative way, if you talk about it in a very in a stigma taboo way, then that's also the tone that your children are going to grow into thinking. That's how they will view it. As for me, my mother as a women's health worker was really out in the open about it. She was not using euphemisms at all. She was very hands-on. She had handbooks with her and comic books with her that were really talking about sex related topics, and she would educate me about it. So it really helped me to become much more open about my body, about menstruation, about anything related to sex. And now I'm an advocate myself, and using the space that I have now to encourage other people also to talk about it openly. So I think just using those opportunities. Like me, I just started asking her, what is a condom used for? What is this? Like, what is that? And why does this stuff look like this? And just those little opportunities, and she just banked on that. So we could talk about it more openly and educate me. I think it's a pretty doable thing and really is effective in the long run as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I also think that's very useful. I did see that while you were answering, some people started also sharing that feedback on that. So I'm just going to read some of them. Someone said, I had to learn it the hard way, which is from the internet. In school, they only taught us how to wear the non-reusable sanitary towels, nothing else. Yeah, I also think I didn't learn much from school, honestly.
Yeah.
I remember it being the kind of topic, and also related to what you just said, Victorina, of if the subject comes as a taboo, the kids continue to speak it as a taboo. I
Yeah.
remember this in school being something that would make the people who menstruate completely ashamed of themselves, and those who didn't completely just making fun of us for a biological
Right.
thing. So
Yeah.
very awkward. Um, Someone said, I learned of menstruation in my earlier classes because our senior woman teacher would do menstruation education for girls from primary to primary to primary 7. This included how to put a pad on a knicker, how do you go about menstruation, emphasizing no missing class, etc. Nice. Someone said, I think it was between my mom and the internet, though to be honest, I'm 25 and I have really started to understand my menstruation in the last 5 years, even though I got my period when I was 11. I think that's also part of your own process as well. I think that's very understandable. Someone said, initially I learned everything from my mom because I thought it was embarrassing to ask other people not close to me. So also again, resonating to what you said, Victorina. Eventually I get to ask my friends, but still behind closed doors and quietly. Sex education really was not incorporated and elaborated in a lot of schools in the Philippines.
True.
So topics like this are still taboo. Last 2 ones, someone said, some parents in Uganda fear speaking about menstruation to their children. Some thinks it's a role for teachers, which is not the case. I think it happens that the teachers think is the parents and the parents think is the teachers. And in the middle, there is this kid who knows nothing, waiting for someone.
Yeah.
Which is very, again, CSC, the comprehensive sexuality education would really help on that. And someone just said, I think a powerful way of teaching children and destigmatizing menstruation and sex education is storytelling. We need more children's literature that focuses on these topics. Yes, and I think we're very lucky to say that in the past years, we have had, I have seen at least cartoons, HQs that are all about periods and menstruation. And I think that is such a fun way to learn more. And it's something that you can give, to your cousins on birthdays and just share these everywhere and just make sure that they're learning from somewhere.
Yeah. And it's at
just
their
age
level. Yeah. And it's also at their level because we do also have to be conscious about the types of information that they could only absorb at the moment. And it's case to case basis also in terms of like what way does a person best learns. So for children, of course, it would be an extra effort. But yeah, so that's a really, really great thing to consider also.
Yeah. Please feel free to continue to share on the chat. I see more things coming. But while you share that, I want to ask, we know that menstruation is not experienced only by cis women. We've mentioned this before today. And therefore, we were wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how can we move from a less binary and more inclusive, move from a less binary and to a more inclusive education about menstruation, that is really welcoming to everyone who menstruates and doesn't keep this narrative that only cis women are the ones menstruating, also because some cis women don't menstruate.
Right. I think the easiest thing and most doable thing for us to do there is to, number one, be aware of our own biases. And second is to actively explore opportunities where we can challenge these biases that we have. Because especially if our understanding at the moment is revolving a lot in the experiences of cis women when it comes to menstruation, then we should actively explore getting to know people who are like trans men, for example, who also encounter or experience menstruation, but they might have a whole new different experience than what we that what cis women experience, simply because of the difference in gender and the experiences that comes with it. So really also proactively educating ourselves and exposing ourselves to people who would let us learn more about how each menstruation experience is different from one gender to another, and maybe from also in terms of the differences in the household setup. Like, it's not always a mother and a father and a kid, right? So there will be gay parents, and other setups in the family. So I guess it's really important for us to like go out there and seek opportunities to get to know these people and learn about how this whole experience is different for them, and where's the common ground and what's different, and how could we come up going forward with interventions and programs and uh, ways that could help them address menstruation in a way that suits them best. So kind of making that process participatory, but also really collaborative. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think also, as we've been talking about breaking the stigma by talking more about it, one thing that is also very important is language, for us to also pay attention in not just saying women when we talk about menstruation, but actually using inclusive language that can be
Yeah.
women and people who menstruate, or
Right.
menstruators, or people who menstruate only, but making sure that we are also in trying to break stigma, not reinforcing another one.
Right.
So just looking inside, as you mentioned, but I think that is definitely something to be explored. And I think just checking the chat to see some people mentioning other euphemisms, which we will also cover soon. And then just the last one here, someone said, my mom taught me how to use a pad and not to be afraid of the blood. So we actually kind of celebrated the arrival of my period. That's amazing. However, I wish sex education was incorporated into the same conversation, because it's an important part of bodily confidence and autonomy. Amazing. Someone also shared, now I crystallized my blood and paint with it. Oh, wait, are you one of our artists? Because this is also something you can see on our watchdog. Someone actually did send us pictures of art they've done with the blood of that period. So it's also amazing. Again, just an encouragement for everyone to download the watchdog. But they say, for my parents, it was very irreverent to see me save the blood and then use it in a natural dye. However, I feel that it is already a form of activism and of breaking down stigmas. Amazing. So happy to hear that now. Yeah, so that's how we close this theme as well. Thank you, Victorina, for sharing your experiences. We will also invite you back again before we close the session. But now I'd like to move on to our final theme, which is cultural norms and practices about menstruation. To talk about it, I will invite Larisha, which I see is already here, who's my colleague in the Youth Coalition and who will join this conversation. Before we begin, I would like to ask our attendees and other speakers to share. Many of you have done it already. I actually just saw one on the chat, but please continue to share what is an euphemism that people use to describe menstruation in your country. I'm from Brazil, and in my country, for example, we say a lot of the expression those days or that time of the month. You know, it's very, it's just like it's something that you don't want to say the name because it's a curse. But and again, it reinforces the stigma. But please continue to share. I will read some of them soon. And for now, I would invite Larisha to introduce themselves and maybe share an example from your country of an euphemism that is used to describe menstruation.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Hello, everyone, and namaste from me. and from Nepal as well. So I am Lirisha Tuladar, currently the Secretary of Youth Coalition. Um, and I've been working for more than 5 years in the section of sexual and reproductive health and rights for especially the young people and young girls, women, and such people. So I'm a graduate of public health, and so that's why I'm also a bit concerned about the health practices of the young people as well. And menstruation comes in one of the most highlighted problem and issues among the young people, especially in our country as well. And I totally echo with all the different practices and different that sharings that has been done by the other speakers as well. And what I'd like to share is that specifically in my country, I'd like to share about this cultural practices called Chau Padi. And that is one of the religious practices that has come in line with our country's traditions and cultures. However, it can be called as a evil practice in our country. So in our country, like all the restrictions that are done for the women in other countries as well, which was shared by the other speakers as well, in our country, the women who start to menstruate, it is believed that it is because they are impure. So impurity, so because they believe that it's the curse of the god that makes the woman bleed, so that because she has done some kind of sin, so they are considered as impure. And this practice called Chaupadi, it is a practice that is mostly done in the far and midwestern region of our country, but however it has extended the tradition, and it is practiced moreover all over our country, Nepal. And some place it is a bit too much, whereas in some place it is bit low. Even in our urban areas also, this practice is very, very, very prevalent, even in the city areas in a little less strict form, but still it is prevalent. So talking a little bit more about this specific religious practice called Chaupadi. Chaupadi is a very local word in our country, where the Chau means menstruation and Padi means woman. So it's like in this practice, they totally isolate the woman from where they are living, and they are forced to live in a very separate hut or a shed, especially not even a proper shed. It's like the house is built with a very less space from stones, just for a human to fit in. And there would be no windows, and it's very dark, and it will be like very separate from the home they are natively living in. And this is very prevalent, and because of this the women, they face like physical, mental, psychosocial, all kind of the problems and issues because of this practices. It's harming them directly, indirectly. But however, as a tradition, they are also accepting this practice, and they are also following it whether they want it or not, because they fear that if they do not follow this tradition, then they might be more cursed from the god, or something more sinful might happen to them. And when, even if we try to advocate, then they are fearful, and they say that no, we'll do this practice because it's our tradition, we don't want to be cursed from the gods. So that's the belief that has been ingrained in our society. That's the stigma that has been ingrained in the society. So these are some of the practices. And when we talk about the harm that this practice has been on the woman, then physically they are isolated in a very cold, lonely, and damp place, because of which they now face health challenges as well. And other is that when it is a belief that they have also restriction, and because of this restriction, they have restrictions in the nutrition as well. They can't eat this, they can't eat that, and that makes them more unhealthy. And we know that how much period cramps, how much we feel it hard to adjust during our period times. We want hot water, but they'd have no access to that, and they have to manage themselves to cook food. And sometimes the sheds are, the Chaupadi shed is so far away, they are located almost in the jungle area, in the rural areas. And that is very scary, and they have to hunt their own food from the jungle area. They can't go to their homes, they are restricted, they can't meet anyone, nobody can give them the food, so they have to go in search of food from anywhere they want to. And sometimes they even go uneaten, not eating anything for a day, for 4 days maximum. So these are some of the harms. And also, when they are isolated in the sheds, they are prone to having the attacks from the wild animals as well. And most importantly, they are attacked from the humans. The rape cases that come out, they are raped, they are harassed, and they have no way out. So these are some of the very stigmatic and discriminatory practices that is related with the menstruation in our country. It's like accepted in a cultural form, but still we know how harmful it is, but no one wants to disclose the actual truth. And other one is the mental pressure, because they get really demotivated, they feel that they are the impure people, and they don't try to come up, and that's why I personally feel that this one practice is also something that demotivates the woman from coming forward, and they feel that they are impure. So why would impure people want to come forward? Maybe they will cause some other sin to other people. So that fear is also ingrained mentally in them, and that's why they are not being able to come out. And socially also, they are not accepted. So whenever they are in menstruation, maybe in other days they're accepted normal, but in menstruation they are treated in a completely different way. Like it's very untouchable, they can't look at the men, they can't touch the plants. If they look at the mirror, they have the belief that the mirror will break, so they
Oh,
don't
wow.
even try. Right? And then they
So
can't touch
much.
the water.
It's so
Yeah.
much. It's unbelievable that, like, I mean, every month you will go through the whole process and through the whole exclusion and your life is put on pause because you really gotta
Yeah.
exclude yourself from your community. It is really outstanding that this is happening still. Thank you for already introducing us to also the background of the experience of menstruation on Nepal, or in this case specifically of things that still remain within the country, and to already introduce yourself by going through all of that. I think that gives us a picture also of how is the situation in other places. And I mean, I'm sure
Yeah, right.
in different levels this happens everywhere. I think just before going into the question, I would just like to go to the chat very quickly, because I see some answers about the euphemisms used regarding menstruation. So I see that someone else echoed that time of the month that I mentioned was something very common in Brazil. Someone mentioned in Ecuador, it is common to say I'm sick, just as a general answer. An euphemism in the Philippines is, I will definitely most likely pronounce it wrong, but please feel free to correct me. May Dalao, which is there is a visitor, which is also it's very scary to say, just there is a visitor. And that's all. I would just disappear for a while. In Kenyan local slang, it's common to say I am rolling. We have heard already today of the Russian invaders, or someone slaughtered a cow. Someone said in Mexico it's called la regla, like a rule or ruler. In Kenya, anti-flow, women's business, rolling, as someone has said. Someone also echoed the regla, that it is also used in the Philippines, like in Mexico. And another colloquialism for menstruation in the Philippines is red tide, which is also a term for a toxic alga bloom in marine waters. Wow. Someone also said it even has a name. Women usually say, I'm with André. I think there is the same in Brazil, actually. We say, I'm with Chico. So why don't we all just say we're on our periods? Sorry, just saying the last one. Someone mentions in Uganda, a lot of names are given in different tribes. She's red, I received a visitor, I'm in the moon, and so many. So it's clear that we all share the experience of using euphemisms not to talk about our own menstruation. And we have been talking about this throughout the whole meeting today, about how this just reinforces the stigma and disinformation and how little we know about it, and makes our experience more challenging. And Candice also shared these restrictions are so heartbreaking. And I think that means about the experience you just shared, Lurisha, about the experience of the women having to exclude themselves and just go through all of that, and still being, as if the violence of being excluded wasn't enough, still being in risk of other types of violence because they are there by themselves. So yeah, pretty challenging. I wanted to ask you if you could share a bit about the work that you have done to try to change these cultural practices in your context. Also, just to give us a little bit of hope after this.
Yes, yes. It's really heart-wrenching even for us because I'm from a different caste and I live in the city area, especially. I don't have that strict traditions, and I also would not strict tradition of Chaupadi, but however, there are restrictions in my own personal home as well, but it's not this strict. Like, I don't have to go out of the home and live in a shed or something. I can't imagine that, right? But yeah, for others, like this Chaupadi, it was considered as a very evil practice. So our government also tried to implement removing these practices, eliminating it, and it was considered as illegal. It was announced illegal in 2017, and also the government itself went to that places where this was very prevalent and tried to demolish the huts that was doing Chaupadi practice. But what happened was the people themselves, they backlashed at the government for destroying their tradition, and it was not a good thing for the government. The government was blacklisted in that community, in that area, and whenever somebody went to try to talk about Chaupadi and how bad it is a practice, then the people in return backlashed at the people who came to tell them, because they felt that we were invading their tradition that has been followed, and they were like cursing us with bad comments. So these kind of things happen because we just didn't plan and we didn't think about the cultural practices that they have been, how deeply ingrained is the belief. But we just went and then we thought from only one perspective that we have to destroy these evil practices, but we didn't contextualize and do it in a proper way. So maybe that was some of the problem that happened. So in my aspect, for the work that I've been doing, I've been very careful because this is some practice that is not in my community but in something, but it carries values in somebody else's practices. So during my advocacy, I do deliver the menstrual hygiene management education in form of the comprehensive sexuality education that I try to give in the rural as well as in the urban areas, especially now this tradition is associated with the older generation people. So I mostly do my advocacy on the young people so that in the future it wouldn't come. It is a bit hard to eliminate it completely because the older people still believe very strongly. So there is, I don't think that there is any way that now we can convince them to totally eliminate these practices. So I mostly do my advocacy. I have been doing, I am still doing, and will still do my practices on educating the younger generation and this present generation of the young people um, on the menstrual hygiene and menstrual practices, on about this tradition as well. I will also say that I am also telling them that this is a cultural practices, yes, that carries the values, but still you can modify them and then provide evidence-based advocacy, like how it is harming them. If we show the evidence that this is actually harming the people, so in human sense, also in a humanitarian feeling also, they might change their behavior. So that is what I have been trying to do in the advocacy, especially on this issues of menstruation. And I have started from my own home. At beginning, in my own home, I used to have a lot of restrictions, like don't touch this and that, don't attend the temples. If you go to the temple, the god will be sad and you would be cursed or something. And I was very scared that if I become cursed, then my exams will be spoiled or something. And even I didn't used to go to the temples. And so I also had that fear and that trauma of when I used to think that during my exams, if I had my periods, shit, I have gone all impure, and now my exam's gonna be spoiled. And I used to spoil my exam in thinking about that. So that was something I did. So now I have convinced my own family, my relatives, that this is not any kind of impure practice. It's just a natural process. And if you do the restrictions, then we have this kind of problems like this exam one. I am more mentally tortured rather than tension about the exam. So that's why this has been happening. So now they are quite lenient about the restrictions, and they are not that strict restrictions. However, to respect their culture, I sometimes do the restrictions while they are having some big religious events or something, if they ask me to, but they don't. And another way, that activity that I've been doing is like, there are different communities, there are different caste systems that have been following this in a different way. So contextually, first I find out their backgrounds of how deeply they are ingrained, how they have been following the practices, and accordingly I gather the evidence about how we can convince them, and then only I carry out the activities. And we have been trying to do it as per how the community wants to have the activities and awareness. Like if some community is not very they don't have belief on the social media post that says that during menstruation you have to do this and that, then how their community works, we have to find that out first, and then maybe in forms of dramas or some role plays, we can gather the youth and we train them about how they can educate their own community. So by involving the community people themselves, the young people especially, we are doing the advocacy. I am doing the advocacy, and in a personal level also for the girls as well as for the young people, I take the sessions online as well, collaborating with different clubs that have been here, the child clubs, the girls club, the adolescent girls networks. And in this way, I'm doing my advocacy slowly by slowly. I can see the change happening. It is slow, but still there is change, I would say. And I also consider very respectfully for the intergeneration that have been following this culture. It is harmful, yes, but I also understand to a level that it is their culture that they have been following since a long time, and it would take time for them to accept the fact that that is evil, because they had not followed that because it was evil. They didn't know about it. They are really scared and they are religiously tied to that belief. They have been made to do that. So I don't disrespect them, but also culturally appropriate practices I follow, I'd say, in my advocacy, especially related to this stigmatic topic of menstruation.
Yes, and that all sounds amazing. Like you're trying to meet young people where they are and not, imposing something. And I mean, honestly, your work really sounds amazing. I'm really proud to work with you. While you were speaking, I was asking people to share good news. So I asked people if they know of successful initiatives like yours who they have led or they have seen around in different contexts regarding menstruation in education or breaking period stigma. So other initiatives that exist that are working on this. I'm just going to read some of the answers. Someone said, in Uganda, youth skills training organization. We train the youth in making reusable sanitary pads to reduce unlimited menstrual materials. We normally have reproductive health talks 1 a week with the youths, and we do advocacy in communities about menstrual management with youth out of school and youth workers who become agents of change in their respective workplaces. Amazing. Someone also shared, I know of a Kenyan brand called Harriet's Botanicals, whose founder sourced local natural ingredients from Western Kenya and created a period product called Ardor Wet, ARORWET. It enhances women's fertility, balances hormones, alleviates symptoms and adenomyosis. And they've been using it for the past years, and it has completely changed the way they experience periods, which is amazing. Someone also shared that in Mexico, there is a group called Menstruation Digna, or Menstruación Digna, actually. They managed to abolish tax on period products this year in Congress. So this is an amazing example, really impressive. So thank you for sharing. I wanted to also bring, other initiatives and things that working.
Yes.
And I think moving to our next question, I would want to hear a little bit from you, because you say you've been doing a lot of advocacy on in education, and we know that this can be tricky when there are beliefs that have been put into people for a long time, and when there are caste systems as well. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit on how can we work on destigmatizing menstruation without replicating colonial dynamics that might have also have their part on the stigma. So just what is your general view on that? How can we do it?
Yeah, I guess in this, the definition of colonization would be mostly the colonization among the caste group and the religious group that follows this. So, not specifying, but still the Hindu religion that we have in our country, mostly those kind of the religious groups follow this tradition very extensively, let's say, and especially the caste that exist in the Midwestern and Far Western region of our country, they follow these practices. So during this not to debunk the colonization dynamics, I think we really need to go specifically on discovering about, first we need to do the research on how much they follow these practices, like how deeply they are connected, and we have to do the research first. I think that's the very first step, because we just can't go and we are an outsider for the community that has been following this. We don't know why they follow it. Maybe they have some kind of beliefs that we are unaware of. And so doing that, I think we have to have some research-based, evidence-based activisms to debunk the stigmas as well. Because they, what I found from experience is that they are very deeply believe blindly all the religion and tradition that have been left by the ancestors. So while we just go and just say that no, cut off this tradition, it's a stigma, it's a discrimination for the women and girls, you don't have to do it, we are the young generation, we can't follow this, no, then they feel somehow like, we are just like this young generation doesn't know anything, and we have that gap itself. So it would be even harder for us to convince, and even if we follow, we might be isolated from the society itself, and we are just the present generation. We can't go forward without their support because we live in a society. So we really need to convince them first. So that is the very first step. So I think the change must come from the individual, because I am a girl who live in my community. I knew how my family would be convinced. The way that I know how my family works, how they think, how they live, how I would be able to convince them. That is different from how I will convince my friend's family. That friend would know better of how they will convince their family. So I think the girl themselves should be the one to initiate the change. They must first be aware themselves, and then only they can convince the society and their family. So I think the change should start from themselves first. But if they need some support, then there should be equal support, not only from the girls, but from the boys and the other males and other people as well from the society. So during the practices, it was shared before by other speakers as well that they have restrictions. And one restriction is that we can't see the men, we can't touch the men, because the men are, we live in a patriarchal society, society, it is believed that if the menstruating woman touched the men would also be committing a sin. So that's why the men are also scared, and they don't want to be around the women who are menstruating, and they don't contribute in making the menstruation dignified. So that is the men's role is also very important, that we debunk the stigmas. So while we are doing advocacy activities, we should also include the men as well, and we should convince them that menstruation is not the issue just of the women and the females and the one who menstruate. It is also the issues of other people who live in the society. And so during the activism also, I even have male members who support me, and they come with me. And when I'm giving the sessions on menstruation, if there is a male friend that I have besides, all the people would be like just looking into the male and they feel uncomfortable. But that's not the process. However, the male are also kept, and especially while I go, even while the facilitator are giving sessions on this menstruation, they will just, if we are giving in the schools, then the teacher will select only the girls and put them in the class. Then we request them that no, we need to give for both. And that's the stigma and discrimination. So I think it should start from the family itself, and it should then slowly go from the school level, and then there should be development in the curriculum where they include the comprehensive sexuality education system. So that's the ultimate key, I think, that giving the sexuality education equally in balance to all the genders, to all the males, females, irrespective of the topic. It should be age appropriate, that's true, but also I think in terms of inclusivity, I think there should be everyone included, and especially when it's the topic of menstruation and such practices that is culturally connected. I think we should also keep in mind that we respect and we include the intergenerational cultures as well, and do proper research and only intervene. So I think that's the ending thing that I'd like to share for all, that is contextual for everyone in terms of breaking the stigmas and discrimination, especially that is associated with the cultures and traditions of someone.
I think it's amazing because you basically did a summary of everything that has been said by the other speakers as well. So before moving on, I would just like to quickly read just two more initiatives that someone mentioned on the chat, as it might be of interest for other participants. So someone mentioned, I'm part of two initiatives in Kenya, one called Endometriosis Foundation of Kenya, where menstruators engage and share their experiences, encouraging each other. And we also have gynecologists in that space. And the other one is Adenostars, where we have a network of menstruators with adenomyosis, advocating for inclusion and pushing insurance firms to cover the condition of their healthcare in their healthcare system scheme. Amazing, really nice. I want to thank you, Larisha. We're getting close to our ending time. So before that, I would just like to invite all of our speakers to come back in camera. So if they can turn the camera on, then we will be spotlighting them. Let me see, I see Candace back and Victorina perfectly. So first of all, I want to thank you for the insightful conversation. It was really amazing to hear about your experiences. And before we leave, I wanted to ask you to share closing remarks by answering what words of encouragement you could share to young activists working on this subject in their country or region. Should we go Candice, Larisha, Victorina? Please, the floor is yours then.
Okay. Yeah, I think, being a menstrual activist, I only started the journey 5 years ago, and I never would have seen myself doing, work on speaking openly about periods based on the experience I had with my first period. And, you know, I always tell any activist this, that you are always going to be on a process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. So always be open to that. Always be open to the fact that there will be experiences that will humble you, and will open your world, because being an activist means you're going to be interacting with people. So you are going to be on a process of always learning, and always be open to that. But I also always just say that you need to prioritize your mental health as well. I've always seen myself having major burnout because of the amount of work I've had to do in helping communities, and that can really affect you. So make sure that in as much as you're putting work out, you're also putting work in, and making sure that you can have a charged battery, so that the work you're giving out is 100% something that you can be proud of. And yeah, like just constantly always, you know, as an activist, I think it's always important to be in a community of other activists, learn from them, speak to them, you know, see what they're doing right. And if you find yourself in a small little community, you know, and you think you need that work as well, do it yourself. You know, like we all have some form of social responsibility in changing the world we live in. And especially as menstrual activists, we have to speak openly about these things. So we are really doing life-changing work. We're changing people's narratives and perceptions of a biological function. So you are going to be doing amazing work, and make sure you're learning from others, and that you're just always wanting to learn.
Thank you. Larisha?
Thank you. Now, as we reach the closing, I think I've summarized most of the things, but what I would like to tell the young people is that the change itself comes from yourself. So if you are yourself scared to come forward with the issues that you are dealing with, you are having to deal with problems, and you are living in a compromisation, then that's your fault, right? So if you have to have some kind of confidence in yourself that you'd be able to come out yourself and bring the change. Maybe it starts from yourself, how you have to bring the change. And then while we are talking in the context of our family, of our community, then if you try to bring the change in yourself, you can change your own family first. And that would be more easier for doing any kind of advocacy for other young people. So if you can just change your own family perception by knowing them, by doing the change, and by doing some kind of intervention in the way that is suitable for them, then at least one family has a change, and then they can support the other families and give motivation for other families to bring a change. So I think that's also something that young people should consider, and especially as I'm sharing about cultural practices in this speaking panel discussion, I'd like to also share that the young people, especially right now in the present, they are more concerned, that they feel that they have more advanced knowledge, they are more understanding, they are more technologically forward. And so that is something that gives them a sort of vain perception, I think. And we tend to directly or indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly, disrespect the older generation. So I think we should also consider, being a young person and a youth, that we have to respect our old generation as well, the cultures, traditions that they have been structuring for us to grow in a very well adjusted. They don't mean harm to us, but it's just their old beliefs. So we must also respect their beliefs, and then how we can modify them in our own way, and take our advanced knowledge into their practices as well, in a very, adjustable way, in a respectful way. We should find out, discover more, explore more. It will take time, of course. We should, but maintain. We are very impatient people nowadays, this young generation. I myself am impatient. I know how it feels, but it's very important to debunk any stigma and discrimination. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of understandable and waiting kind of evidence-based work for debunking the stigma. So I would say that have patience, young people, and don't hurry to rush any and debunk any stigmas. It's not gonna happen very soon, like tomorrow, unless a miracle happens. So that's something I'd like to share on my closing remarks. And the change starts from you. My last line. Thank you.
Thank you, Larisha. Victorina?
Yes. So for me, there are three key takeaways that I want to close this conversation on my end. So first is be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. So we really need to have those uncomfortable conversations because our goal is not to make menstruation a comfortable topic to talk about. Our goal is for menstruation to be a topic that's seen and heard, and for our experiences about menstruation to really be recognized and validated by our society, by our families, by our policies in the workplace and in the government. Second is to be the person you need when you were younger. So, whatever it is that you've experienced during the first time that you had your menstruation, or whatever struggles you faced during that time, I want you to think about it as an inspiration for you to do better when it's your time, like I did for mine. So it's really something that, that's inspired from within, it's rooted from within, and you'd always be grounded because of that. And lastly is, if I understand that not all people are comfortable like speaking out in the open about topics that they really care about and advocacy that they really care about. So you could also explore creative outlets if that's something that you're more comfortable about, like exploring hobbies and skills like writing, drawing, painting. There's tons of things that you could do for you to voice out how you feel about menstruation, how you feel about the stigma that's attached to it, and just to let the world out there know that it's an important topic to be discussed, and that you're just not going to be silenced in any way, and that you're always going to find, ways to be seen and be heard when it comes to a topic that you really care about, because it is something that wouldn't just affect our generation but the succeeding generation as well. So if it does become hard, I hope we think about the future generation of girls, that we're not just doing this for us but also for them. So yeah.
Love that. Thank you. I think I just want to finish with a big thanks to all our speakers for these inspiring closing remarks. Thank you also for everyone who joined us on these amazing conversations, but especially to our artists and contributors of the Watchdog who send their arts, send their poems, everything, and also took the time to participate today. We really appreciate you doing that. Please follow us on our social media channels if you want to get more news and resources about sexual and reproductive rights and about advocacy. You should be able to find our social media handlers on the chat. My colleagues Ruth and Maria will be sharing it. And also don't forget to download our Watchdog and take a look at all the amazing texts, pictures, arts, the arts that have been mentioned in this conversation as well, done with people's own periods and everything. It looks incredible. Please download it and take a look. The link to download should be on the chat. And I see you next time. Thank you for joining today. Bye-bye, everyone.